Hey, you ever wonder which brands are putting out the most horsepower? Yeah, me neither. Oh wait, you do? Well, of course we all know which cars are the most powerful on this planet. You know, the Bugattis, the Koenigsegg's, even those Pagani Huayras. But we took the horsepower from every car in every brand's lineup and then added them up. Vans and semis were excluded, of course, but after a whole lot of math that made my head absolutely spin, we figured out which brands put out the most power. And the last one on this list is pumping out over 9,000 horsepower. And if you're new here, I'm Brad Danger, this is Ideal. Please subscribe and turn on that notification bell and buckle up and let's go. So Maserati has a total of 1,114 horsepower, thanks to the Ghibli with 345, the Levante with 345, and the Quattroporte with 424. Now, I know what you're thinking. Did Maserati drop the ball on horsepower this year? And the answer is no. Not really. The reason that they're at the bottom of this list is that they only put out three models: the Ghibli, the Levante, and the Quattroporte. And in truth, all three have pretty solid horsepower numbers, even if they do get outshined by some of their luxury competitors. But the next brand totally deserves to be at the bottom, like way down there. Yeah, we're talking about Mazda with a total horsepower of 1,302. You got the Mazda 3 with 186, the CX-5 with 187 horses, the CX-3 with 148, the Mazda 6 with 187, the CX-30 with 186, the CX-9 with 227, and what is always the answer? The Miata with 181. Okay, is it just me or does every single Mazda have super low horsepower? And yeah, Mazda didn't roll out a ton of models in 2020, only 7, but in that whole lineup, they only cracked the 200 horsepower barrier once with an SUV, the CX-9. And I don't want to rag on Mazda too much because you know how much I love the Miata, but Mazda had some pretty pitful horsepower numbers this year, and I really don't know how you could recover from that. I don't know, maybe up the ante next year, but that's to be seen. And the Mazda Miata specifically is a momentum car, which is what I love about it, and it helps you become a better driver by driving it. Essentially, it takes care of the nut behind the wheel, and so I don't think it needs that much more horsepower, but come on Mazda, put something out with over 300. And this next brand builds some pretty powerful all-American cars, SUVs, and pickups, but its lack for variety, which is a lot like my diet, has landed it near the bottom of the list. Yep, we're talking about Dodge, putting out 1,346 horsepower this year. And that's due to the Challenger with 305, the Journey with 173, the Durango with 293, the Charger with 292, and the Grand Caravan with 283. And Dodge has been a name that's been associated with affordable American muscle for generations. And that legacy has continued into this year and beyond, at least we hope, until the EVs take over, because EVs seem like 900 horsepower is like nothing these days. How much does the Hummer EV have? Yeah, 1,000 horsepower and 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. What is just a regular person gonna do with all that power? That sounds kind of dangerous. Are you excited or scared of the EVs that are coming in the next couple of years? Let us know down below. And yes, for Dodge, we only looked at the base trims. We didn't go into the crazy Hellcats and SRTs and all that good stuff. And RIP the Viper. That would have helped a little bit with the horsepower if they would have continued to build it this year, but that project kicked the bucket a couple years ago. And this next brand just isn't trying to appeal for us horsepower craving gearheads. You know that company, Subaru? Yeah, it put out a total of 1,426 horsepower, with the likes of the BRZ at 200, the Outback at 182, the Forester at 182, the Ascent at 260, the Legacy at 182, the Crosstrek at 152, and the good old WRX at 268. And Subaru makes cars for the crunchy, intellectual types. You know, the ones that may or may not be like you and me. So it's no surprise that the offerings in 2020 didn't have the most impressive power. Subarus just aren't built, at least in stock form, to jump from 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. Although if you modify one with that turbocharged 4-cylinder boxer motor, you can get some pretty impressive numbers pretty quickly and on a budget. But stock, they're built to be reliable, fuel efficient, and solid both on and off-road. And in all of those areas, this year's Subaru lineup was pretty good across the board. But this next brand might impress you just a little bit more. We're talking about Infiniti, which put out a total of 1,563 horsepower, thanks to the QX60 with 295, the Q50 with 300, oof, I love that car, the QX50 with 268, the Q60 with 300, and the QX80 with 400. No, unfortunately, Infinity's total horsepower number this year was not, infinity. However, it was pretty solid considering that they only had 5 models. And the weakest vehicle, the QX50, put out 268 horsepower. And that's one seriously sporty SUV. And if you want bigger and badder, you can upgrade to the 400 horsepower QX80 with a towing capacity of 8,500 pounds, which could pretty much tow my whole house. And no, the brand's power is not infinite, but I certainly wouldn't say that they had a wimpy lineup in 2020. And let's move on to the next brand, which is named after one of the most powerful animals on this planet. Any guesses? It's a British company. Yeah, if you were thinking Jaguar, you were right. And they had a total horsepower number of 1,677, with the I-Pace leading the way at 394. Then you have the F-Type at 296, the E-Pace at 246, the XE at 247, and the F-Pace at 247. And I think we all know that Jaguar makes some pretty sweet luxury vehicles. And they've also been dipping their toe in the electric EV game with the I-Pace. And with that thing packing 394 horsepower, that is pretty much instantaneous. Tesla, you better watch out. Which, if you don't know everything about Tesla, well then, here's your opportunity. This is one of my favorite videos. And the I-Pace and really every manufacturer in the next couple of years is gonna be taking them on. Even that EV Hummer we just talked about, which is absolutely bonkers. And again, this reiterates my point that the EV world, the horsepower numbers are absurd because besides the I-Pace from Jaguar, all the other offerings were right under 250 horsepower, with exception of the F-Type. And that is a coupe that has some serious style and 296 horsepower. And we keep going back to EVs because, well, they are the future, and this next brand is at the front lines of pushing that envelope forward every single day. Yeah, we're talking about Tesla. And they had a total of 1,679 horsepower, thanks to the new Model Y with 384, the Model 3 with 258, the Model S with 778, and the Model X with 259. The Model S is a beast. And in terms of car brands that made the most headlines this year, I would put Tesla at the top and then everybody else kind of down here. However, due to the fact that they only have 4 current models, they've fallen down this list quite a bit. Maybe the Roadster will boost their horsepower numbers once it eventually finally comes out, but I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for it. But apparently the thing is gonna have a SpaceX rocket thruster behind the rear license plate, and that is what I call power. And the next brand on this list, it's an Italian manufacturer that put out 2 cars this year with over 500 horsepower. Yeah, we're talking about the one and only Alfa Romeo. With the Giulia at 280, the 4C Spider with 237, the Stelvio with 280, the Giulia Quadrifoglio with 505, and the Stelvio Quadrifoglio with 505. Alfa Romeo is quintessentially Italian in the way that it seems that they're always more about appearance than they are actual power. But that being said, they did have 2 cars in their lineup, that Giulia Quadrifoglio and that Stelvio Quadrifoglio, that both crank out over 500 horses. And what's nice about Alfa Romeo is that their older models are usually pretty affordable, at least the price that you pay to get into it. The price that you pay to keep it on the road, well, that's a totally different story. But hey, at least you get some Italian styling, some pretty impressive power, and get it all for pretty cheap. But if you want a little bit more reliability, well then you may go for an Acura, which put out 1,852 horsepower, thanks to the ILX with 201, the TLX with 206, the RLX with 310, the NSX with 573, the RDX with 272, and the MDX with 290 horsepower. And I don't know about you, but I personally love this newest generation of NSX. I love the hybrid technology, I love the design language, but more than all that, I love its roots. I love the first gen NSX with those pop-up headlights, and it really was one of the first daily drivable supercars, and one that I would love to have in the stable here at Ideal one day. And the one thing that I really like about Acura is that, well, it's the luxury brand of Honda. And Honda really had nothing to talk about this year as far as horsepower numbers go. But Acura put up some pretty good numbers. And I think all of their offerings are actually pretty ideal. But that NSX with 573 horsepower is essentially a life-size Hot Wheel car. And it's an absolute gem. But it ain't no pickup. And this next American manufacturer has rolled out some badass pickups this year. Yep, we're talking about GMC, who built the Yukon with 355 horsepower, the Sierra 1500 with 277, the Terrain with 170, the Acadia with 193, the Canyon with 181, the Sierra 2500 with 401, and the Sierra 3500 with 401. And if you're looking for a powerful truck to traverse the toughest terrains on this planet, the GMC dealer should be your next stop. And they got some badass pickup trucks like the Yukon and the Sierra 3500. And this year, those were sporting some pretty impressive power numbers. And I don't think really anybody does trucks better than GMC, so you really can't go wrong with any of their offerings. And our next brand is pretty much the ultimate reliable luxury vehicle. If you had to buy something that was high-end and it would run forever, what would you buy? A Lexus. But they also put out quite a bit of horsepower this year. Yeah, like 2,699 horses. Thanks to the IS with 241, the LX with 383, the RC with 241, the ES with 215, the UX with 169, the RX with 290, the LC, which is one of my favorite design language cars of all time, with 354, the GX with 301, the NX with 194, and the GS with 311 horsepower. And I think it's a safe bet that pretty much everybody loves Lexus. And that's probably why Squid never stops talking about his GX 470, which I feel like I need to straight pipe one of these days. But all of Lexus's offerings are both reliable, they're luxurious, and they're pretty powerful. And that LX in particular is a boat-sized SUV that drives like a sports car with a 5.7 liter V8 pumping out an impressive 383 horsepower. And it does just as well off the road as it does on. And it probably will like never break down on you. And up next is another brand in the super luxury division that really should be higher on this list, but they only made 5 vehicles this year. Yep. We're talking about Aston Martin with a total of 2,858 horsepower, because you got the DBX with 542, the Vantage with 503, the DB11 with 503, the DBS Superleggero with 715, and the Rapide AMR with 595. And of course, Aston Martin put out some incredibly powerful cars, and it honestly hurts a little bit not to have them higher on this list. But again, we are talking about total horsepower from a brand. And since Aston Martin is a boutique brand and it only makes a few different models every year, you got to put in some big horsepower numbers like the DBS Superleggera, which is just a straight up beast with 715 horsepower, and it looks mean and its bark is mean pretty much because it has a big V12 just sitting there ready to go. Man, Aston, keep doing your thing. I think we all love the cars that you guys make, but I just wish they were a little bit more in my price range, you know? Yeah, I gotta talk to my boss, see if I can get like $1 million an episode or something, you know? Then I could be rolling in an Aston Martin. Be like Bond, James Bond, Brad Danger. Ooh, that has a good ring. Anyway, on deck is another brand we here at Ideal absolutely love. So much so that I bought 2 of them. Yep, Porsche, putting out 2,868 horsepower. Thanks to the Panamera with 330, the 718 Boxster with 300, the Cayenne with 335, the Macan with 248, the 911 with 379, the Taycan with 562, the 718 Spider with 414, and the 718 Cayman with 300. And again, the EV takes the cake. The Taycan has 562 horsepower, which is 150 more than the next most powerful offering. And yes, Porsche undoubtedly makes some of the most fun cars to drive, and their horsepower numbers are pretty impressive, but they're gonna be way more impressive once the whole lineup goes to EV, which that actually pains me just to say. I mean, can you imagine a base Porsche 911 with like 600 horsepower from an electric motor and instantaneous torque? Yeah, the game is gonna change real quick. And I think you can see some of that fear on my face. What's gonna happen to the ICE cars? Is there gonna be a market? Are people gonna want internal combustion engines? Or are the electric's gonna be so much better that the dinosaur burning cars, like both 911s that I have, just become obsolete? I don't know what keeps you up at night, but that definitely keeps me up. And while we're on the German brand Porsche, let's talk about another luxury marquee from Germany that builds both powerful and diverse vehicles. And yes, we are talking about Mercedes, that put out 3,386 horsepower this year. Thanks to their C-Class with 255, their GLC C-Class with 255, their E-Class with 255, the S-Class with 362, their G-Class with 416, the GT class with 469, the CLS class with 362, the SLC class with 241, the A class with 188, the GLS class with 362, and the CLA class with 221. Yeah, if you didn't realize it then, well, you realize it now that Mercedes has a class for pretty much everyone's needs. And one thing they have in common for this year is impressive horsepower numbers across the board. Whether you want a tank-like SUV with gut-wrenching power under the hood, you got your G-Wagon with 416 horses. Or if you need something sporty, you could get the GT class with 469 horsepower to get you to and from the grocery store in no time. And as impressive as Mercedes is, this next brand from Japan, well, they've built some pretty uninteresting rides, but there still is a few diamonds in the rough. I think you know what we're talking about. Nissan, which put out 3,401 horsepower this year, thanks to the Titan with 400, the Pathfinder with 284, the Rogue with 170, the Versa with 122, the Ultima with 182, the Murano with 260, the Sentra with 149, the Armada with 390, the GTR with 565, the Kicks with 122, the Frontier with 310, the Maxima with 300, and the Leaf with 147. And for the most part, Nissan's lineup just didn't really wow us anywhere. The Versa is about as bland of a vehicle that you can buy today. And the Leaf is not even close to the top of the EV market. And the Kicks is an injustice to the sport in sport utility vehicle. But the GTR, on the other hand, let's talk about the GTR for a second, because this might be Nissan's redeemer with 565 twin turbocharged horsepower. And although this current generation has been around for a little too long, you can't blame Nissan for continuing to build its Halo car and continuing to impress us with how much horsepower you can extract from this platform. And Nissan does sell quite a few vehicles, but this next brand is the most popular in the world. Yeah, we're talking about Toyota with 4,066 horsepower. And that's because the Tundra has 381, the Highlander has 295, the Avalon has 301, the Supra has 335, the Sequoia has 381, the 4Runner has 270, the CHR has 144, the RAV4 has 203, the Camry has 203, the Land Cruiser has 381, the Yaris has 106, the Tacoma has 159, the Sienna has 296, the 86 has 200, the Prius has 121, the Corolla has 139, and the Mirai has 155. And really the only vehicle to talk about on that list is the Supra. And that B58 engine is one of the best engineering marvels of the last couple of years. And I think it would be a ton of fun to get our hands on one on this channel, but the fact that I just bought my fiance a new Jeep and I'm now making payments on that, it might take us a little while to get a new vehicle, to be honest. But that's okay, because let's go back to America with this next brand. And you wouldn't necessarily associate Ford with horsepower, but you gotta remember they make the Mustang, and so yeah, they had 4,559 horsepower this past year. And that's thanks to the Escape with 180, the Expedition with 375, the Explorer with 300, the Ranger with 270, the Bronco with 181, the Mustang Shelby GT500 with 760, the Edge with 250, the EcoSport with 123, the Raptor with 450, the Fusion with 175, the F-150 with 250, the F-250 with 385, the F-350 with 385, and the F-450 with 475 horsepower. And Ford's been pumping out V8 since the 30s, and so they know how to make a good old American V8. But it seems like they may have kind of lost their way, because some of these offerings are kind of wimpy. And yes, I understand they're going for fuel mileage and these cars are more appliances, but come on. Put a little horsepower in it. A little extra horsepower never hurt nobody, but luckily they build some badass trucks like the F-450 with 475 horsepower and the good old Raptor with 450. And of course, how could we not mention that Mustang Shelby GT500? 760 blistering horses, baby. And from one American automaker to another, let's talk about Chevy, who had a total of 4,836 horsepower. And that's thanks to the Blazer with 193, the Camaro with 275, the Colorado with 200, the Colorado ZR2 with 308, the Camaro ZL1 with 650, the Corvette Stingray with 495, the Impala with 305, the Malibu with 160, the Equinox with 170, the Spark with 98, the Silverado 3500 HD with 401, the Silverado 1500 with 285, the Sonic with 138, the Suburban with 355, the Tahoe with 355, the Traverse with 310, and the Trax with 138. And it just blows my mind that Chevy can put out something as powerful and as fun as the Camaro ZL1, which has 650 horsepower, and then just turn around and build something as unbelievably boring as the Chevy Trax, or something as painfully weak as the Chevy Spark. A car with under 100 horsepower that comes out today, Come on, Chevy. That's record-setting level of wimpy. And I bet that ZL1, if it could talk, would be embarrassed to share the same badge. But let's hop over to Italy and let's talk about Ferrari. Yeah, Ferrari had a pretty good year, pumping out 5,098 horsepower. Thanks to the F8 Tributo with 710, the F8 Spider with 710, the SF90 Stradale with 986, the GTC4 Lusso with 602, the Portofino with 591, the 812 Superfast with 788, and the 488 Pista with 711. Okay, as always, the boys over at Ferrari put out some seriously incredible sports cars this year, and the creme of the crop was the SF90 Stradale, which I don't know if I love the styling on, but there's no denying the performance. It's powered by a big V8 and 3 electric motors. And while we're on the topic of Ferrari, well, we might as well talk about Lamborghini as well. That just edged them out in the horsepower wars because they pumped out 6,539 horsepower. Thanks to the Urus, which had 641, the Huracan was 631, the Huracan Evo Spider was 631, the Aventador was 730, the Aventador SVJ was 760, the Centenario was 759, the Scion with 808, the Scion Roadster with 819, the SVJ Roadster Zago was 760. Yeah. And I'm the first to agree that this year really wasn't the greatest, but at least Lamborghini had some stuff to smile about. And when you think exotic and you think horsepower, you do think Lamborghini, but some of those numbers are insane. Like the Scion Roadster with 819 horsepower. And if you've stuck around with us this long and you're enjoying this video, please hit that like button for the YouTube algorithm and also subscribe if you're new here because this next manufacturer has some incredible horsepower numbers. Yeah. We're talking about McLaren, and they pumped out 7,004 horsepower because you got the 720S with 710 horsepower, the GT with 612, the 600 LT with 592, the 570S with 562, the 540C with 533, the 620R with 612, the 765 LT with 755, the Senna with 789, the Speedtail with 1,035, and the Elva with 804. And McLaren makes some of the coolest looking hypercars on Earth. And we all know that they have the power of Thor's hammer inside of them. But the star of the show this year was the limited run Speedtail with over 1,000 horsepower, which is pretty much the same as the Hummer EV. Wild. But that Speedtail has a twin turboed 4-liter V8 with a parallel hybrid e-motor system. And when you have a top speed of 250 miles per hour, you better watch out because that Speedtail is straight up a bat out of hell. But what's crazy is this next manufacturer builds a car that can dust the Speedtail. Yeah, I think you know who we're talking about, Bugatti. And they pumped out 7,260 horsepower with the Chiron that had 1,183 horsepower, the Chiron Super Sport 300 Plus with 1,500, the Devo with 1,500, the Cento DC with 1,577, and the La Voiture Noir with 1,500. And Bugatti has pretty much perfected the craft of building unbelievably fast cars with mind-boggling power output numbers. And they literally did not make a car with under 1,000 horsepower this year. And that Chiron Super Sport 300 Plus is the 3rd fastest production car ever and has a top speed of 304 miles per hour. I mean, you knew the guys at Bugatti were crazy, but the amount of power that they're willing to throw into their hypercars is insane. And yet it's not even the top dog on this list because this next brand, well, they beat Bugatti mostly because they just built a lot more vehicles. And so we're going back to Germany, and yes, we're talking about Audi, who put out an astonishing 8,924 horsepower, thanks to the A3 with 184, the R8 with 562, the A4 with 188, the A8 with 443, the Q3 with 228, the Q8 with 335, the Q7 with 248, the S8 with 563, the TTS with 288, the e-tron with 355, the Q5 with 248, the SQ8 with 500, the S4 with 349, the SQ7 with 500, the A7 with 335, the TT with 220, the S3 with 288, the S7 with 444, the SQ5 with 349, the A6 with 335, the S5 with 349, the S6 with 444, the RS Q8 with 591, the A3 with 184, and the RS3 with 394. Count that all up, and that's 25 models. And seriously, that is a massive lineup. And if you can't find something in there that you absolutely love, well then there probably isn't a car on this earth that would satisfy you. And power output for Audi was pretty solid across the board. Everything from the RS Q8 SUV that pushes out 591 horsepower to the weakest link, the A3 with 184 horsepower. And yet, hey, the A3 is still a pretty solid car. And Audi is a very solid brand. And yet somehow, some way, this next automaker edged them out with the most horsepower this year. Any guesses? Yeah, BMW, with 9,094 horsepower. And they did it with the 2 Series with 228, the 3 Series with 255, the 4 Series with 248, the 5 Series with 248, the 8 Series with 335, the M240 with 335, the X2 with 228, the M340 with 382, the i3 with 170, the X1 with 228, the i8 with 369, the M850 with 523, the X3 with 248, the X5 with 335, the M550 with 523, the M8 with 600, the M5 with 600, the X6 with 335, the M235 Grand Coupe with 301, the M760 with 600, the M2 with 405, the 7 Series with 335, the M4 with 425, the X7 with 335, the Z4 with 255, and the X4 with 248. Whew. It's a lot of cars. And for the company that put out the most models this year, also has the most horsepower. And that M8 with 600 horsepower, yeah, that thing is an absolute land yacht beast of a car. And it's kind of crazy to think how many different models these manufacturers are making for people. They really are trying to build a vehicle for every single person's taste. And there you have it. This video was all about manufacturers from the least horsepower to the most. And which brand surprised you? Let us know down below. Please subscribe, hit that like button, and keep living the ideal lifestyle.